The bus crawled slowly down the shattered highway. The crunch of stones under the wheels, the stifling heat, the scorched fields flashing past the windows, all of it pressed down on the mind like warm, viscous, heavy cotton wool. The bus jolted over a bump. Stevie flinched and looked around, feeling how fatigue was smearing across his consciousness, as if greasy fingers were dragging it over the glass of his mind. He tried to remember what he had been talking about with the guys just a minute ago. Girls? The championship? The memory crumpled like an old letter and vanished. To his right sat Tommy, the agile receiver with a restless smile. Or was he? Stevie frowned. A couple of hours ago, or how long had it been? Tommy had been sitting across the aisle closer to the window. Now he was sitting here, silent, staring out the window, blinking like a machine. Stevie wanted to ask him something. What? He didn't know. But his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. "Coach," he croaked, "this isn't the right road." "I know," Harrison replied, "but we have no choice." Stevie noticed that it had grown lighter outside, lighter than it should have been. The sky had dulled, as if covered in milk, and the shadows of the trees had disappeared entirely. Shadows. Stevie turned his head to the window. There were no shadows. None from the bus, none from the sparse poles, none from the plastic bags drifting over the ground. The light was flat and muffled, as if someone had erased the very idea of sunlight from the world. Inside the bus, it was growing stuffy. Conversations died away. Only the rustle of fabric, sighs, and the scratching of fingernails on armrests remained. Stevie looked again at the rows of seats. Too many were empty. Far too many. He counted. 1, 2, 3. Empty seats where the guys should have been. Backpacks lay abandoned on the seats, but the players themselves were gone. He turned to Harrison. "Coach, where's Mike?" Harrison threw him a tired glance. "Mike who?" "You know, our lineman. Stevie fell silent. The image of Mike was slipping away from his mind like a painting washed away by water. His face blurred, his voice faded. Was there ever a Mike? Flickered through Stevie's mind. He wasn't sure anymore. The bus jolted again, this time harder. Many flinched. Andrew jumped to his feet. "What the hell?" he growled. "How much longer, Harrison? We're not there. We're nowhere." The coach stood up slowly. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Sit down, son," he said quietly. "Just sit down." Andrew exhaled sharply and sank back into his seat. And suddenly Stevie realized Andrew had been sitting next to him earlier. Now, 3 rows ahead. When had he moved? And had he ever been sitting next to him at all? Silence smothered the bus. The engine's roar stretched into a long, dead thread of sound, and from the very back of the bus, someone was still tapping slowly on the window, evenly, leisurely, tap, tap, tap. Stevie gripped his knees with his hands. He wasn't sure how many of them were left in the bus, and he wasn't sure anymore if they had ever even left in the first place. "Listen!" Justin's voice, the skinny runner, broke the silence. "Does anyone even remember where we're going?" There was a stir inside the bus. Stevie slowly turned around. "What do you mean? To the training camp, in Granttown. Are you joking?" Justin scratched his head, frowning. "Granttown?" He said the word like it was something alien. Andrew, sitting ahead, turned around in his seat. "We're not going to Granttown, idiot. It's Pine Creek. It's closer." A muffled movement swept through the bus. Someone scoffed, someone laughed nervously. Coach Harrison didn't intervene. He just sat there, hands folded on his knees, staring into the murky window. "Pine Creek," Justin muttered. Granttown. His lips moved silently, as if he were trying to remember where those towns even were. Stevie rose from his seat. "We're going to Granttown," he said a little louder than intended. "It was in the schedule. It was—" He trailed off. The picture in his mind suddenly blurred, like watercolor smeared by spilled water. He remembered how the coach handed out routes, how they packed their bags, but no city name, only a feeling, only emptiness, like a dream you can't grasp right after waking. "Maybe," someone from the back rows drawled, "maybe we weren't going anywhere at all." The words hung in the air. Andrew shot up. "Shut up!" He stepped into the aisle, looking ready to punch someone, but he stopped, and everyone saw his face, not angry, not furious, confused. So confused it radiated a sticky fear. The engine's hum stretched out, monotonous. Outside the windows, the scorched fields and charred poles streamed by. And the emptiness. "How long has it been?" Stevie asked aloud. No one answered. He pulled out his phone. The screen was black. Not off, not dead, just blank. He tried to wake it up. Nothing. Stevie glanced around. He saw that almost everyone else was doing the same, checking their phones, watches, wristbands, and for all of them, silence. Nothing. "Maybe we—" Justin began, but clamped his mouth shut with his hand. Andrew turned to the coach, Harrison. "What's going on?" The coach slowly turned his head toward them. His eyes were dull, like polished stones. "We're driving," he said softly. "Everything's fine." His voice was too even, too foreign, and for a moment Stevie thought Harrison was repeating words someone had planted in his mouth. Stevie sank back into his seat. The rustle of cloth seats, the rhythmic tapping on the window at the back, the steady drone of the wind. Outside, the same endless fields. But at the very edge of his vision, Stevie caught movement. A shadow. Something running alongside the bus. Gone the moment he tried to focus on it. He clenched his fists, trying to hold on to the thought. Trying to hold on to any reality at all. The bus smelled of sweat, cheap plastic, and the musty fabric of the seats. Stevie, the scrappy defender, was vainly trying to find a radio signal. Crackling clicks, half-choked fragments of songs. Nothing clear. "Drop that crap," someone muttered lazily from the back seats. Stevie snorted, switched off the radio, and leaned back. Nearby, two guys were having a sleepy conversation about girls, sipping warm soda from plastic bottles. Coach Harrison, tall, wiry, with parchment-stretched skin, sat in the front seat, absently tracing the map with a finger. He frowned. By the plan, they should have already reached the nearest town, but outside, only the same pale fields, rare tufts of grass, and dusty tracks stretched endlessly. "What the hell?" Harrison muttered, squinting. The young driver in the baseball cap glanced at him. "Something wrong, Coach?" Harrison shook his head. "Navigator says go straight, but I think we missed a turn." A voice drifted from the back of the bus. "Coach, maybe we missed a gas station? I'm thirsty." "We'll find one," Harrison answered, and stared at the map again as if trying to read the way home from it. Time flowed strangely. Some of the guys began to doze off, slumping in their seats. Others just sat silently, staring at the useless landscape. Stevie looked out the window and shivered faintly. He thought they had passed the same charred pole for the third time, the same shape, the same crack at the base, even the fluttering shred of blue ribbon in the wind. He blinked and decided it was just his imagination. Maybe 20 minutes passed, or an hour, or more. The heat thickened into a boiling stew. Sweaty seats stuck to the skin. The coach whispered almost to himself, "We should have been there already. We should have—" He brought the map closer to his face, and Stevie noticed his hands trembling. Something flickered outside the window. Something like a road sign. but the sign was blank. Just a rusty plate on a pole. No letters. No directions, as if the road itself had forgotten where it led. Andrew, the cool, composed quarterback, stood, stretched along the aisle and tossed over his shoulder. "Feels like we're circling the same place." No one answered, because deep down, everyone on the bus felt it too. Something was wrong with the road, with the map, with time, maybe even with themselves. Stevie looked once more out the window. The charred pole stood there again in exactly the same spot. And this time he was sure. Someone was slowly running a finger along the dangling blue ribbon. The bus rumbled like a massive dying beast. The creak of seats, the dull roar of wheels, the cracking of parched lips. Stevie stared into the aisle between the seats, but the image blurred before his eyes. He felt his consciousness starting to crumble, like dry clay slipping through his fingers. Justin was trembling in the seat next to him, muttering under his breath, "We're on the highway. We're on the highway. We're heading to camp. Everything's fine. We're—" His voice broke into a whisper. Andrew stood up and staggered down the aisle. The sound of his sneakers squeaking on the sticky floor filled the bus. He stopped in the middle of the aisle. "This is all a dream," he said quietly. No one responded. "A dream? Understand?" His eyes were dry and burning with rage. "We just have to wake up." His fists clenched. Stevie tried to say something, to stop him, to warn him, but the words stuck in his throat. Andrew, hands shaking, pulled a leather belt from his pocket, his sports belt with a buckle. "If I feel pain, I'll wake up," he said. "It'll end." He turned to Coach Harrison. "Right, Coach?" Harrison said nothing. He just stared into space, as if he no longer saw anything. Andrew wrapped the belt tightly around his forearm, tighter, until his fingers turned white. "Watch, Stevie," he whispered. "I'll show you." Stevie jumped up. "No, Andrew, don't." Too late. Andrew slammed his fist into the metal frame of a seat. Once, twice. On the third hit, a sickening crack echoed through the bus. Dull, wet, distorting the very air. Andrew doubled over, gasping in pain. His arm hung limp at an unnatural angle, like a piece of wet cloth. Around him rose a smell, not blood exactly, but something sharp, metallic, hot, like burnt skin. He started laughing. Tears streamed down his face, but he laughed. "Pain! There's pain!" he rasped. "But we're still here! Damn pain, and we're still here!" His laughter turned into coughing, then into silence. No one approached him. No one moved. Everyone sat frozen in their seats, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes, as if he were no longer entirely human. Stevie slowly sank back into his seat. He felt the cold pooling in his chest. Real, sticky cold. Not physical. Worse. As if his very memory was starting to freeze from the inside out, and with each second he doubted more and more. Was this bus ever real? Was there ever a road? Had they ever truly been alive? Andrew sat in the aisle, clutching his broken arm and rocking back and forth. The bus kept moving. To nowhere. Stevie stared out the window. At first he tried to make out something in the dusty wasteland. Trees, fields, poles. But now there was only white. Not fog, not light, not a barren field. Just nothing. Like a burned-out film strip, when the frames are completely erased. No lines, no sign of a world. He froze, and with horror realized the window glass no longer reflected his face, only a flat, grayish surface. He lifted his hand. In reality, his fingers trembled. But in the reflection, Nothing. Just a smooth, empty space, as if he had never existed there. "Coach," he croaked out. Harrison didn't turn around. He was still staring forward, where the road dissolved into the milky haze. Justin jumped to his feet. "Everything's wrong? It's all wrong. We're stuck." He grabbed Stevie's shoulder. "Say something! For God's sake, tell us where we're going!" Stevie opened his mouth, but said nothing, because he suddenly couldn't remember, not Justin's name, not his own last name, not even why they got on this bus in the first place. The aisle between the seats seemed longer, much longer, like a corridor lined with endless mirrors, and at the very end, where the guys used to sit, there was no one left. Only empty seats, and backpacks, abandoned, silent, like relics of people who had been there, or should have been. "Where are they?" Stevie whispered. No answer. He staggered forward down the aisle, row by row, empty, empty, empty. Those who still remained in the bus sat in silence, their eyes vacant, staring into nothing, like broken dolls, like echoes of someone else's life. Stevie returned to his seat and froze. His bag was gone, simply gone, like a drawing wiped from sand, and with it, the feeling that he had ever owned things, or memories, or even a name. He buried his head in his hands. The world swayed, empty windows, the coach muttering to himself, Stevie himself dissolving into the trembling air. The bus was no longer driving, nor standing still. It was just floating in the void, like a wrecked ship adrift in a silent ocean. Stevie closed his eyes, and for a moment he believed it really was a dream, that he would wake up any second now, return home, to the familiar field, to his friends, to life. But when he opened his eyes again, there was no trace of the world outside, only a crushing white emptiness, and the faint hum of his own dying mind. The bus slowed. Stevie felt it not with his ears or eyes, but with his entire body, as if something huge and heavy had decided to stop. No screech of brakes, no jolt, just stillness. He opened his eyes. In front of him stretched the same endless white nothingness, an endless milky fog, void of depth or light. Beyond the window, no road, no earth, not even sky. Only a cold, sticky void in which the bus hung like a wind-blown boat. Stevie stood up. His legs trembled, but he moved down the aisle, feeling the floor beneath him grow lighter, as if the ground was crumbling under his shoes into dust. He turned. Coach Harrison sat in his seat, hunched over, his head in his hands. The others, empty. Only vacant seats and abandoned belongings, dull in the dim light. For a moment, Stevie thought, maybe he was the only one left alive. Maybe the others had already disappeared. Maybe they never existed. He approached the doors. The automatic door shuddered as he neared, as if the bus itself had forgotten how to open. Click. Silence. Click. And again. Only the dying moan of the machine. He pressed his palm against the glass. It was cold, icy. And under his hand, the glass began to melt, as if his fingers were leaving not the prints of a living being, but shadows. "Void!" he whispered, and his voice sounded so dull it seemed swallowed up instantly. Suddenly behind him a whisper sounded, dry, cracking. He turned. Coach Harrison was looking at him. His eyes were wet like an old man's, one who no longer remembers why he's alive, and he said, "We've been there, for a long time now." Stevie didn't understand at first. He slowly walked back down the aisle. Each step grew heavier, each breath emptier. He reached his seat, and he saw. Sitting there was himself, slumped over, with a crushed temple, a face twisted in a final scream. His bag lay on the floor, The broken shoelace spilled out like a snapped thread of life. Stevie stared at himself and understood. He was dead. They were all dead. Long ago, when the bus had turned the wrong way, when reality had cracked, when the road had swallowed them and spit out only shredded shadows, unable to realize they had been gone for a long time. He wanted to scream, wanted to run outside, but there was nothing beyond the doors, and nothing inside the bus. Only silence, only the last stop, where all roads end, and the road becomes a grave. Stevie stood in the bus aisle, staring at his dead body, the scars on the forehead, the broken cheekbone, the torn team uniform. He barely understood what he was seeing. It was like looking at a stranger, someone who had once been him, but had long since dissolved into air. The engine was silent. The bus stood still, forgotten, lost in the void. Stevie turned toward a sound. Coach Harrison sat breathing heavily. He barely whispered, "We tried," and fell silent. His eyes dulled. His head sagged onto his chest. And Stevie realized, now he was truly alone. Outside, the white abyss still swirled, but now it was slowly seeping inside. Thin streams, the slime of time and space crawled along the floor, wrapping the seats. Everything was becoming softer, brighter, and forgotten. Stevie stepped toward the door. His foot sank through the floor, as if the ground was made of thick milk. He stumbled, and felt the world around him shifting, not hostile, not painful, just slipping away. Like water filling your lungs, like forgetting the last line of a favorite song. He slumped to the floor, leaned against an empty seat, closed his eyes, and allowed himself to remember. The smell of grass on the school field, the coach's pat on the shoulder after a good throw, the boys laughing in the locker room throwing wet towels. He clung to these images, held on with all his strength, but the memories slipped away, like dreams when you wake up in a strange place. Stevie opened his eyes and saw only white. The bus was gone. The seats were gone. The ground was gone. He was gone. Only emptiness remained, without shapes, without pain, without time. The last thought was simple, not of fear, not of life, just a faint, and that thought dissolved, like morning frost under a foreign sun. Silence, white light, and nothing more.